Released in 2016, VAXXED, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe, has been a rallying call for the anti-vaccination movement. Written, produced, and directed by Andrew Wakefield, a doctor who lost his medical license and was discredited by many mainstream scientific communities, it comes across as a passion project of self-redemption, as well as pushing conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. The story centers around a whistleblower at the CDC, as well as Wakefield himself. And while it neither exonerates Andrew Wakefield nor proves the corruption in the CDC, gullible people worldwide have bought into its claims. As such, this series is a long-form refutation of not only the film and its claims, but an examination into who is behind VAXXED and why they made it. Welcome back to my long-form refutation of the documentary VAXXED. Now, previously, we looked into some of the key players behind VAXXED, Andrew Wakefield's shady past, and some of their more bizarre connections. However, today we'll be dealing with a very sensitive topic surrounding the brutal murder of a disabled boy. This was Alex Spourdalakis, and Alex was diagnosed with autism at a very young age and was mostly nonverbal for his entire life. And as sometimes happens with autistic children, sometimes when puberty hits and the drastic changes happen within their body, they can develop rage and violence problems. Alex, unfortunately, was one of those children. Between the years of 2012 and 2013, Alex, his mother, and his caretaker, his godmother, were involved in a misadventure of pharmaceuticals, hospital visits, violence, and unfortunately tragedy. And all of this was due to an inability to control or cope with Alex's violence issues. This ultimately culminated in June of 2013 when Dorothy Spourdalakis and Jolanta Skrodska brutally murdered the young man. Now, what does this have to do with Andrew Wakefield and the VAXXED team? Quite a lot, actually. You see, his autism media channel put out a documentary entitled Who Killed Alex Spourdalakis? In this episode, we will be examining this horrifying story, the backgrounds of those involved, and how Andrew Wakefield himself directly profited from it. On the 9th of June 2013, Alex's father and his uncle kicked in the door to a bedroom inside the apartment where Alex and Dorothy lived. They had been able to reach anybody on the phone, and fearing the worst, they went to investigate. And there they found, laying in a pool of blood on the bed, was Dorothy Spourdalakis and Jolanta, with Alex's body in between them. He had been stabbed 5 times in the chest, and his wrist had been cut so deep his hand was almost completely severed. Later, the police would find a note that Dorothy had written saying that she was no longer going to allow her son to be treated like an animal or be discriminated against, and instead she was going to release him from the pain of the world. Now, the events that would lead up to a mother choosing a murder-suicide for her son are grossly misrepresented by Andrew Wakefield and the VAXXED team, the reality of which is actually a lot different. But in order to get there, we're going to have to go further back in time to really understand how this started. Now, the first reference I could find to Alex's violent behavior comes from the documentary that Wakefield put out. Sometime around in 2012, he was hospitalized after assaulting his mother. Then the film goes on to talk about a litany of drugs that he was prescribed, as well as possible diagnoses that he might be suffering from, like colitis. Unfortunately, the rage and violence issues continued, and Alex also had numerous problems with his bowels. Then on February 16th of 2013, he was brought by paramedics and police officers to Gottlieb Hospital. This began an extended stay in emergency rooms at Gottlieb Hospital as well as Loyola Hospital, and it was around this time that the anti-vaxxers got involved. The group Autism is Medical, or AIM, is a quack group run by self-professed mothers of children with autism, and they are solely dedicated to the idea that autism is caused by gastrointestinal distress, much like how Andrew Wakefield has been claiming for years. Their members, in fact, travel with and promote Wakefield constantly, and then on February 24th, they were contacted to get involved in the Spourdalakis case, and Jenna Reed from the group arrived.
I received a call from a friend who was a healthcare professional that was looking for support for a patient that was in desperate need of, 1, support for the mom, and 2, medical care. that they were not currently receiving.
Furthermore, the group Age of Autism, which often runs parallel to Autism is Medical, got involved. And in fact, here's an article written on March 8th in which they describe, AIM, we're enrolled to help the staff at Gottlieb understand Alex's complex medical profile. According to one of the AIM representatives, clearly what they're doing isn't working. In reality, they were invited by the mother into the room and were, for the most part, as far as I can tell, pests to the doctor. This is from 3 days later, another article.
So, what is the medical plan in place for Alex, Jenna asked. Prior to this question, there had been much conversation about Alex's constipation and uninvestigated bowel issues. The hospitalist smiled through his response. While I cannot do the procedure today, I can at least introduce Miralax. Jenna questioned the point of this, since magnesium citrate was already attempted to no avail. What are you treating, though? Have you considered an X-ray, CT scan, scope? Jenna asked. The doctors shrugged their shoulders.
For some reason, these people are obsessed with colonoscopies for autistic kids, but further down the article it reads,
My immediate concern is Alex's safety, he replied. To me, a non-medical person who has been forced into the awful and tedious practice of having to read medical journals and scientific studies, this response is a non-answer disguised in the form of concern. The colleague piped up, Autism is very much a mystery you have to understand. And that, my friends, is when I lost it. No, it's not. It's a medical illness that causes bad behavior. All you have to do is read.
I'm sure in 8 years of medical school that doctor had somehow managed to avoid all reading. So this is the genesis point. This is where the anti-vax cult got involved. And you can even see with this picture here, Jenna Reed and Lisa Goes posing with concern over the boy. But this is where things really began to heat up. This is when things got very different.
The autism team was contacted by Dawn Loughborough, particularly to help resolve Alex's continuing gastrointestinal problems.
Now, before we get to the autism team, I'd like to point out that name, Dawn Loughborough. Now, I investigated her a little bit during my bot documentary series, which you should check out. But what's really worth noting is that she runs the DAIR Foundation, and that stands for Defending Academic Integrity and Research. And the regular speaker at their events? Andrew Wakefield. And in fact, it's very, very possible that some of the grants that they put out in the name of this charity go to Wakefield himself, and a large portion of it is confirmed to go to Dawn Loughborough's salary. Now, what is the autism team?
20 years ago, autism was very rare. For a child born today, the risk may be as high as 1 in 25. Groundbreaking work by the autism team means that children can be treated effectively. So join us and follow their journey.
Founded by Polly Tommy and Andrew Wakefield, the Autism Media Channel is their foray into the entertainment industry. This is largely on YouTube, but then later went into making the movie VAXXED. Now, they were actually very forthcoming on what they were doing with the autism team. Now, see, their goal was to create a reality TV series where they would travel around the country and help families of autism. Now, with the Alex Spourdalakis case already ramping up in the media and being reported on all over the place, they latched onto this family like a pack of vultures. Now, make no mistake, there is no hyperbole here. Before and after Alex's death, after they got involved, almost every single bit of coverage involved quotes from Polly Tommy. And even, as I will show in just a little bit, spread onto mainstream news. But before we do, it's actually really important that we point out this intertwining series of organizations. You see, after Andrew Wakefield left Thoughtful House, he then founded the Strategic Autism Initiative. Now, this is a charity by which its own tax records will show it paid out Andrew Wakefield's salary over hundreds of thousands of dollars. And some of this money actually came in the form of donations from Generation Rescue. That is the charity run by Jenny McCarthy and racks in millions of dollars. Now, Wakefield also had the support of one of the co-owners of Troublemakers Studios. It's the movie company that owns Spy Kids. And this was Elizabeth Avellan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. At the time, she was married to legendary filmmaker Robert Rodriguez, and they showered Andrew Wakefield with support, wrote glowing reviews of his book, callous disregard, and even did fundraising for Thoughtful House. Now, beneath that is the DARE Foundation in Don Lowborough, and then you even have the people on the street groups like Age of Autism and Autism is Medical. This is a towering cascade of strangely interconnected organizations. But it gets crazier. You see, all of this is a giant fundraising machine that claws onto celebrities and exploits vulnerable families, all of which to sprout a campaign of misinformation. Now, last but not least, Wakefield's organization Strategic Autism Initiative in 2011 paid out $158,000 to one Lenny Gonzalez. Now, suspiciously, this is the same Venezuelan researcher who confirmed Wakefield's results when he was funded previously, again, through Thoughtful House, which we talked about last episode. Now, what was it he was paid for in 2011? I'm glad you asked. You see, it was to work with this man, Arthur Krigsman. And this is where the Alex Spourdalakis case gets really infuriating. Now, Krigsman, it should be noted, was actually a part of the autism team, no doubt, trying to achieve TV doctor status with some of these stunts. Now, in the documentary, he claims that Alex Spourdalakis was suffering from ulcers. However, to my knowledge, nobody has actually confirmed any gastric biopsies after he was scoped, and I don't even know if Krigsman himself even attempted to do a biopsy on it. Now, again, it's really worth noting from the last episode that Krigsman was fined previously by the Texas Medical Board for advertising services when he wasn't even licensed yet. And in fact, he once sued a hospital for curtailing his privileges to perform colonoscopies on autistic children, to which the hospital believed that there was no medical necessity for them. Nevertheless, Krigsman scoped Alex, oh yes, and he diagnosed him with inflammatory bowel disease. At this time, Alex had been in and out of hospitals and commonly in restraints, 4-point restraints in fact. And while the hospital's position was that his rage and his violence was a result of a psychiatric condition, his mother disagreed. And she was fully in the belief that this is a biological situation, that this is being caused by his gastrointestinal issues. Yet strangely, and I suppose unfortunately, Alex was not miraculously cured because he was now being treated for inflammatory bowel disease, after Krigsman said that's what the problem was. Oddly, his rage and his violence continued, and in fact, even worsened. Now, over the next few weeks, he again was admitted to hospitals, and then in May of 2013, a month before he was murdered, the autism team showed up again. As well, Wakefield himself recorded this video as a plea for help and posted it on the Autism Media channel.
Okay, this is Andy Wakefield. I'm here with Alex Spourdalakis. Alex is destined in the next 72 hours to go to long-term psychiatric care, an institution in the absence of his mother and his godmother, without whom it's going to be a very, very frightening experience. It's going to appeal to the autism community that we need to act. What we need is a safe place for Alex to be, where he can complete the treatment, where he can be on the necessary diet. So we're here in Chicago. What we need is someone in the Chicago area, ideally, to provide these facilities. So it's an appeal to the community, and it's an appeal that must be met with urgent action in the next 72 hours.
Now, this is where it gets nefarious. You see, the emergency room doctors were ill-equipped to help Alex. They're emergency room doctors. They're not trained how to deal with violent children with mental conditions. And given that it was largely a psychological problem, they wanted to refer him to facilities or an institution that was specialized to deal specifically with these problems. Alex's mother was understandably terrified of the concept of having to place him into an institution, but it wasn't just her that was feeding into this fear. In this clip, you're going to hear Polly Tommy herself speaking with Dorothy Spourdalakis.
Are they not going to let you be with Alex? You can't be with him.
The psychiatric facility.
No, you can't. We can't do that. He's going to be scared out of his mind.
That's the only choice I have. I have nowhere else to go. That's how it's going to be. You do not stay with kids in a psych unit, and if you're lucky, depending on which one, they tell you can't see them for the first 30 days.
Now let's hear that one more time.
You can't be with him.
The psychiatric facility.
No, you can't. We can't do that.
That, right there. You have a woman who's separated from her husband. She's afraid of her very violent son. She has no idea what's going on. She's being fed this belief that all the doctors around her are wrong, that she actually does know what he needs, but for some reason they just won't give it to her. She's at her wit's end, at her last resort. And you have Polly Tommy saying, oh no, we can't put him into an institution. Keep that in mind. Now, Dorothy never put Alex into a facility, and instead left only to the care of emergency room doctors, who were ill-equipped to really handle the problem that he was having, because it was psychological. He was administered a whole lot of drugs. Now, let's hear what Wakefield has to say about that.
Like Dr. Frankenstein, all the medical staff could do was stand and stare at what it was they had created.
I'm sure you can see where this is going.
To Dorothy and Agatha, it was now inevitable that Alex was headed into the endless nightmare of permanent psychiatric care.
Ultimately, the Spourdalakis family had to leave the hospital. The insurance just wouldn't pay for them to stay any longer. Now, the documentary, Wakefield himself, frames this as them being kicked out on the street into the cold, even though they did have an apartment to return home to. And a week later, Alex was brutally murdered. In the documentary Who Killed Alex Spourdalakis, Andrew Wakefield frames this whole thing into a giant condemnation of the medical industry. He alleges that it was a gastrointestinal issue that led to Alex's violence, and that the medical industry itself refused to consider that possibility, despite him being examined by quite a few doctors. He alleges that they failed to listen to his collaborator, Arthur Krigsman, and he also tries to pin the erratic and violent behavior of Dorothy Spourdalakis on the fact that she was taking Lexapro.
There is one final twist. The relentless specter of medication was to make a further appearance. The autism team learned that Dorothy was taking an antidepressant.
Ultimately, this is done to provide an answer to the film's titular question, who killed Alex Spourdalakis? In his mind, and how he frames it is, well, the medical industry. The medical industry killed Alex. Following the murder and the attempted suicide by Dorothy and Jolanta, there was a torrent of news articles and reports on television, often accompanied by quotes from Polly Tommy. Now, notably of these was a report done by Cheryl Atkinson over at CBS. Now, this is really noteworthy because she had previously reported on several anti-vax talking points, and the way she frames this report makes it sound like Dorothy and Jolanta were the victims. Let's take a look.
Dorothy was like any other autism mother, desperate to get help for her child. How much do you want to know?
Polly Tommy, mother of an autistic son herself, is producing Alex's story for the Autism Media Channel, a website with the mission of helping those living with autism. Dorothy believed Alex's violent outbursts were triggered by severe gastric pain, but nobody seemed to know what to do with him. A glimmer of hope came when autism advocates connected Alex to a gastric specialist in New York. His diagnosis confirmed Dorothy's suspicions. But Dorothy couldn't handle Alex while she pursued treatment. She says no facility would keep him and insurance wouldn't cover it. Dorothy's emails reflected growing desperation and exhaustion. Alex has been forgotten. I didn't have a safety net so I could help him recover.
Now this repeats article after article, always with Polly Tommy there to guide the conversation in the right direction. And now Wakefield himself even piped up when one organization wanted to see this prosecuted as a hate crime. He asked, well, where was all the support? Where were all the people coming out and trying to help this family? And this is a brilliant media move. It basically framed it as, well, they had no support whatsoever, and eventually poor Dorothy just snapped, and Alex was just dead. But there's a problem with that. Now, autism is a very difficult condition to deal with, and it can manifest itself in varying different ways, varying different types of severity. And children, when they're going through it, tend to need very specific type of care. And especially going through puberty, kids need a lot of support, and it can't be handled the same way you would treat any biological condition. It needs specialized care. And now through the decades, we have refined and improved upon our techniques for helping people with severe mental conditions and children who are put into crisis. And while, of course, being admitted to a facility is not ideal and could be emotionally devastating, it at least gives the child a chance at rehabilitation. And I know it does, because I used to work with children that came out of that system. I used to work specifically with autistic people who were in crisis for years. Now, the truth is that the Spourdalakis family had a choice. They had a choice. Dorothy and Jolanta made the choice, the decision, to commit murder rather than give Alex the chance. All because they were fed into a delusion that this was a fate worse than death. They poisoned a 14-year-old boy. And when that didn't work, when he didn't die, they drove a knife into his chest over and over again, and then slashed his wrist so deep his hand almost came off. This was not mercy, this was cowardice, further reflected in the fact that they tried to kill themselves and failed miserably in that too. And to make matters even worse, this was premeditated. They talked about this for a week before they murdered this boy. This was entirely premeditated. They made a conscious decision over 7 days to ultimately end his life. And also, bizarrely, like how they were saying they were saving Alex from having to be put into an institution, they killed the house cat because they were afraid it would get put into a shelter? And also, the truth is that the Spourdalakis family was offered help. They were offered help by the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, as well as their local autism society. These people did reach out. They tried to help. Now, Dorothy denied help from the DCFS, presumably because it involved traditional treatment of autism. And in place of traditional help and treatment, she had her quackery beliefs reinforced and reaffirmed by the cheering support of Age of Autism, Autism is Medical, and the Autism Media Channel goons. And in the end, when she chillingly and brutally murdered her own flesh and blood, she was then hoisted by these people as a martyr for their cause. On December 14th, 2016, Dorothy Spourdalakis and Jolanta were released from prison. They had been sentenced to involuntary manslaughter, and their sentence was time served because they'd already been in jail for 3 years. That's right, they got 3 years for involuntary manslaughter in the premeditated butchery of a disabled boy. While the Autism Team reality TV show never actually manifested, the footage that they shot of the Spourdalakis family was then used in the documentary Who Killed Alex Spourdalakis and sold online. Wakefield then went on to produce VAXXED. Dorothy and Jolanta did 3 years for involuntary manslaughter, and for the most part, the rest of the world forgot Alex. And that's the true tragedy of this. The story right now is not seen as the murder of an innocent disabled child. No. It's all about how the medical industry is terrible, and there's all this collusion to leaving families without support, and also a sob story for a butcher. You want to know the truth? You want to know who really killed Alex Spourdalakis? They did. They killed Alex Spourdalakis. It's as simple as that. But ultimately, when you start to uncover all of the myriad of factors, the influencers that fed into a deep delusion, you start to understand how tragic this is, and how nefarious some of these beliefs can actually be.
Murder parents. Parents are taking the lives of their children already because they will not leave their children in a world as it is today. And I, for one, will never judge them for what they do.
Now, I'd like to take a minute and I'd like to thank Dr. David Gorski, as well as Matt Carey, and many others who actually covered these events as they took place. Their tireless work trying to uncover and reveal the operations of the anti-vax cult have been incredible and a huge source of information and fact-checking that I relied on. And without their work, this video wouldn't have happened. So thank you, gentlemen, very much. Now, there will be more videos on VAXXED, I guarantee you that. There's still so much more to this story, so much to the history of the players and all of the terrible things they've done in the past. And even if it takes me years to cover all of it, I will. So, from my family to yours, I hope you are well. I wish you the best. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.